Hello, legends. So I analyzed over 2,000 n8n automation scenarios, and in this video, I'm going to be giving you the key insights that I learned so that you can build better workflows. We'll be covering a bunch of different insights and looking at a bunch of different metrics. We'll learn about how many nodes are used on an average per workflow, what kind of triggers are used more often, what are the most common nodes that are used as well. We'll be looking at different categories and complexities of workflows across those 2,000 that I've analyzed, different actual categories of automation that were completed, most common AI providers, the top 10 nodes that are used, the top 10 integrations that are used. So this means like which tools, which third-party tools are these workflows integrating with in order to automate and process data, which credential types are the most frequently used as well. We've got the most common sequences that are used from those 2,000 scenarios, and then a bunch of different efficiency and security information as well. And I've synthesized all those learnings, all those insights into this 6-page document. This actually includes not only the insight, but the action you should take to apply that insight to your workflows. So some of these are security recommendations. Some of these are recommendations on how to adjust your workflows. Some of these are recommendations on how to make your workflows faster, when to use different AI models, a bunch of different tips and tricks that you can actually apply to your workflow starting from today. And the link to download this will be in the description of this video. Now, before we start digging into all those insights, I actually want to show you my process for how I ran this analysis. So I'm in Cursor right now. Cursor is an AI coding tool. What you see here is probably, it might be a little bit overwhelming if you don't use something like Cursor, if you don't write code yourself, or if you're not a vibe coder. I am a vibe coder. I can only write code with AI. And I basically started by first collecting 2,000 plus JSON files of n8n workflows. So when you're in n8n and you actually create a workflow, something like this that has a couple of nodes on the canvas, these nodes can be saved onto your account. And the way that these are saved is by using a JSON file. So if I save this right now, and then I go to download over here, I actually download the JSON file of the workflow that I have. And if I just open this up now, this is that workflow that I just created. It's called My Workflow 26. And this thing that you see here in the middle is actually that exact workflow. So all this information, all these different characters, this is called the JSON workflow of what we just got. Now, on this left-hand side, I've got 2,050, I think it is, different JSON workflows that if I show you, let me just click into this random one, get comments from Facebook page, that opened up here in the central panel. If I just Control A, copy this, go back across to n8n. If I just delete this, and now I've got that JSON file copied to my clipboard, if I just press Control V, as you can see, that workflow just pasted onto my canvas. So I've got 2,000 different types of workflows like this that are for a variety of different use cases made by a variety of different people. And now because we're actually working in this JSON file, this is a standardized format of data. So whenever you're building n8n workflows, there's a standardized format of how this JSON has to be constructed. And that means that each of these separate workflows, all these 2,000 plus different workflows, they all use the same format. The only thing is that they have different nodes. But it's very easy for us to write a script that can actually read one of these workflows, and then we can pull out the key data. For our case, we can pull out which nodes are used, how many nodes are used, which credentials were used, because all that kind of stuff is like placeholdered into this JSON, into the JSON scenario. So yeah, the first step was to actually download all 2,000 of these, and I was able to get this off a public GitHub repo, and I'm pretty sure it's a collection of public workflows from different GitHub repos that you can just download from n8n directly. And then after I downloaded all these workflows, my next step was to write a script to actually start going over these and collecting some data. Now, I wrote a script instead of using something like n8n to actually review these for two main reasons. One, it's like when you know how to code and when you know how to use tools like Cursor, when you know how to use AI to actually write code for you, it is so much faster to go over like 2,000 sets of information than actually trying to build out the workflow in something like n8n. Because over here, I'd have to get those workflows, put them up into like a Google Sheet or an Airtable, some kind of database, and then I'd actually have to manually build out a flow to iterate over each one of them. It's totally possible, but it probably would have taken me 5 or 10 hours to get all the nodes on there, start understanding the format of the JSON. It'd be very, very complicated. Whereas in Cursor, I can literally just copy and paste one of these into this right-hand side chat window and say, hey, here is a standard JSON workflow from n8n. Based on this structure, please create me a script that can iterate over thousands of these simultaneously and then create me some kind of analysis. And to create that analysis, all I really did was, hey, I want to pick out, these 5 bits of information. Please pick out these 5 bits of information per different workflow and then aggregate them into a report. So the first report I created was this one over here called workflows-report. And you can see that it has pretty cool information. So total workflows 2050, total amount of nodes. It uses basic logic processing in the back to count which nodes were there, how many times they appeared, which ones are the most frequently occurring. So a lot of this analysis is just like logic processing in the back end. And you can see it was roughly 32 active lines of analysis across those 2,000 plus workflows. Some of these were just, empty. So it did take me some time to kind of iterate through the script and start developing something that would not only like work across every single workflow and not kind of give me empty credentials, but it would actually pull out more substantial information. So then the next report that I generated was this one here, this enhanced report. And this thing has got a bunch more information. As you can see here, it's heaps and heaps of info. And it's total of, just like about 200 lines of insights. So from the initial 30 lines to 200 lines, that's like 6 to 7 times more data that we pulled out. Then my next step was to actually create this really nice compact visual that I could display to you guys, because looking at this kind of code and this stuff all day would be very difficult and probably a little bit overwhelming. So then I just I converted all that data that we saw in this TXT, which is like human readable plain English, to JSON format. JSON, by the way, in case you're already noticing, is one of the most common ways to actually process data across the internet. This is how APIs consume information. This is how LLMs can work with information. So it's a very common data format. I converted all that information from the text file into a JSON file like this. And then I created a report.html, which would actually be used to display this information here. Now, the interesting thing is I did use Claude Opus 4 to write this entire script for me, the one that actually went through each of those 2,000 scenarios and pulled out that key, like all those key insights. This script was 1,100 lines long. So there's no way I could have written this myself. My process here was actually to start by using GPT 4.1. I then flipped across to Claude 3.7, and then I went across to Claude Opus 4. So in general, I think the workflow when you're vibe coding and trying to do data analysis should be to use a variety of different LLMs just to see which one is better suited to the application, and ultimately landed on Claude Opus 4. Okay, so now that we understand how we actually built this analysis, we had 2,000 plus files. They're all using JSON format. We then built a script using Claude Opus 4 to go over, and now we're aggregating the data in this HTML page over here. I'm actually going to have these pages side by side, because as I go through some of this information, I actually want to be either building out a workflow or putting the nodes onto the canvas so you know exactly which ones are being spoken about. So the first key insights that we have are that 917 workflows, so 44% of all workflows, are actually using AI to process, to complete some kind of task. So it's usually for data processing or for generating like generative AI, where they're creating responses to different questions that humans might be placing into the scenario. So a lot of these are focused with using AI, but interestingly, not every single one of them uses AI. Roughly around 1 in every 2 does not use AI. So that's a pretty good takeaway. When you're building your workflows, it doesn't have to be like n8n isn't just for AI, generative AI. It's actually also used for just regular automation. A task happens and a notification is sent somewhere else. The majority of workflows, so 97% of workflows, have no error handling mechanism. A quick bit on this actually is, let's say we get a HTTP node. So for example, if I have this, error handling means that if this HTTP node fires off when I'm in testing and it works perfectly fine, but out of every 100 calls, something might happen and the HTTP node might not work and it might fail. So an error handling mechanism here is actually to go across into the settings, and in the backend you can actually change, introduce some kind of retry mechanism. So for example, on this button over here, on an error occurring, what do you want to do? Do you want to stop the workflow? Do you want to continue passing through? Or do you want to continue passing through but using an error output? So if I click error output and I go back onto the canvas, now this actually has 2 different outputs. One is a success output, assuming that everything goes well. Let's go through with the rest of the workflow. But if it doesn't, then actually how do we build some kind of sequence here to help us manage this error? Do we need to retry, or do we need to go back into an AI step to reconfigure some of the settings? Like, what do we need to do there? Also in this HTTP node in the settings, and actually a lot of the error handling for a lot of the nodes that you're using will be in the settings panel. Typically if you're using like even a code node, let's say. So if we go to here and type in code node, if I go across to the settings as well, I have a similar like on error, what do I want to do? Continue using an error output. retry on fail, how many times you want to retry. So there is a lot of error handling that you can do in these workflows. It's very important for you to actually apply these to your scenarios, because typically if you don't have error handling, if it breaks, that specific operation, that specific run is not going to produce any results. And really, if you're building these out for yourself, the consistency is what you want. So then we have a quick highlight of all the common nodes. Sticky note is the most common at 7,000 occurrences. This basically is saying that we've got 2,000 different scenarios. So roughly it's 3 sticky notes per scenario. I think because we're using a lot of these templated workflows, they have a lot of sticky notes because they need additional information to give to the end user that's going to be using it. But in general, best practice is to use sticky notes, because if you're building out this scenario, you've got 5 people on your account, and you want to handball this scenario off to someone else. You're working for a client and you want to build a scenario on their account, or even for yourself. Like, you just want to understand in the future, when you have 10 different workflows, or 10 different, what does this bit do? How do I optimize this? What's the current issue with this? Using sticky notes is a really good way for you to actually keep context within your workflows and just keep everyone working on the same page. So sticky notes, the next most used node is the set node. So if I go into here, I'm just going to go and type in set. It's this edit fields node. So edit fields node is, you guys probably already using this. This basically lets you set a variable. So if I just click here, I can define a variable called name, and then from the previous execution, like a HTTP call or whatever else my previous steps are, maybe it's an AI agent step, I can just dynamically insert that value into here, and then I can set the name to be customer's name. So this is the second most used node. The first most used node is sticky note, but that's just by, I think it's just because these are templates that we're working with. And then we have HTTP request nodes, which is this thing here. So it looks like literally these 3 nodes, we have sticky note, HTTP, and set or edit fields are the most common ones. So going down a little bit more here, this is actually super interesting, because this is one thing that I've been thinking about for quite a while is, what are the average number of nodes in a workflow? Because you're on YouTube and you see heaps of people putting out workflows that are like 50 nodes and multi-agent teams and systems, and is that really necessary? That's the question that I have been asking myself, and from my workflows, I don't think it has been necessary. But now, after analyzing 2,000 different workflows, I can definitively say that no, it's not necessary. So here's a distribution of out of those 2,000 workflows. This is a distribution of how many nodes are used per workflow. So we have 1 to 5 nodes in a workflow, 27%. So 554 workflows. 6 to 10 nodes is 20%. 11 to 20 is 30%. And then 21 plus is 20%. So this is saying that 20% of all workflows will have 20 plus nodes, which is like 20 plus different ones of these. But actually 80% of workflows, looking at the 80-20 principle, 80% of workflows have fewer than 20 nodes, which means that you don't actually need a lot of nodes to have a successful automation. And between these two, 27% and 20%, nearly 50% of all the workflows have fewer than 10 nodes. So this is a really cool takeaway. It basically tells me that your workflows that you're building in n8n, they don't need to have 50 nodes. They can have 5 or 10 nodes and actually complete a specific task and still be successful and effective. Really, when you're building out n8n scenarios, you don't want to have 50 tasks completed within one workflow. It's better that you just have like each n8n workflow that you're creating, it just completes a simple task. It's easier for you to manage. It's easier to manage with errors in your workflow. And yeah, in general, I'm a big fan of like specializing workflows to just complete one task. So that's an interesting fact over here. Just quickly looking at triggers, 81% of workflows have triggers. Now, a trigger is this thing that we're looking at over here, click when execute. This one, which is click when execute, actually is this manual start trigger. So you typically only use this trigger if you're demonstrating a workflow. So a lot of YouTubers will use something like this, or they might use one of the chat nodes. So on chat event, something like this, and they can interact with their AI agent. Yeah, these are typically used for demonstration purposes. This one is used if you want to deploy a chat bot on your website. But yeah, really, if you're finding a workflow that has this as its starting point, it's because you need to figure out what your actual starting trigger is. And a trigger is basically something that is event-based. So if I just go into here, add another trigger, n8n describes it as a trigger is a step that starts your workflow, and it's typically based on some kind of change in event. So you've got on a schedule, so you can make this run every Monday at 9 a.m. You've got a webhook, which is like a a phone number that you can use, that you can call your n8n scenario from different apps and tools. On a form submission, common ones that people would use is things like this. So like on app event, which is a third-party app, and you might do Airtable. So every time a new something is changed in an Airtable table, then it might trigger this agent to run. Or every time, where we have something else here, every time a cal.com booking is canceled or created, it might then trigger something to happen here. So let's say we have on booking canceled. So now we're creating a workflow. I know it's getting messy here, but let me just put it out of the way. So maybe your trigger is this, and you know, after you authenticate it to your account, whenever a booking is canceled, you might actually just get this to automatically send you an email. So you have Gmail over here, and it might say send a message. Where is the send a message one? Here it is. So now you actually have booking is canceled, it sends you a message. Or maybe it actually just goes to the customer and says, hey, thanks for confirming your booking is canceled. Do you mind answering, let me know why it's canceled. And if you're doing like lead gen and you're getting a lot of like cancellations, this might be a really good way for you to just start collecting some data about that. So this is all about triggers, very important to start your workflows, and very good way to actually build dynamic workflows. But if we keep going through here, so this is the high level categories. These are scraped off the actual descriptions. So over in Cursor, it's actually scraped from this stuff over here. This is the actual title of the workflow. But then if you dig into the workflow, there's also a tag that you can use. So you have the title of the workflow here, which is my workflow 26, and then a tag that you can add as well. One of the takeaways from the report that you download, the 6-page report, is actually using effective naming for your actual workflows. So there's a naming convention in that report, and also using effective tagging. n8n does also have using folders. So it's really important to organize all of your workflows. And it does contribute to actually creating effective workflows. So over here, we have workflow categories, AI, ML. So this is like using LLMs to process certain, to complete certain tasks. Data processing is massive with, what's the stat over here? 16% of workflows are data processing. Other, so this is just exposing the fact that heaps of people have not defined what the workflows do at a high level. They haven't used these appropriately. And then you have AI, ML, so 45% of workflows include some kind of LLM processing within them. Then we have some workflow complexity. So majority of workflows that we have from those 2,000 workflows, they're simple. You don't actually have to build very complex workflows in order for them to be effective. And you can see that from those 2,000 workflows that we have. Then we have moderate, and then complex, which is slightly small, so it's only 17%. So between the simple and moderate, we have 38.8% and 43%. We have roughly 85% of those 2,000 workflows are simple to moderate. So they're workflows that you can build. And once again, I think once you start going through this report and you start seeing that the average amount of nodes is 14, more than half of the workflows have fewer than 10 nodes. And then you're looking at like simple and moderate. This is only, 10 nodes, right? 10 to 14 nodes, and you can actually build out your automation. So hopefully that makes it a lot simpler for you to bring down that barrier for entry in your head to actually completing a successful workflow. And then you have over here, so business process breakdown. So once again, general, because it's really not listed. Data analytics, IT operations, sales and marketing, customer service. So some of the ones down here, probably not so popular. If you're an agency and you want to know what to build out, unfortunately, these aren't really labeled. So 75% aren't labeled. But data analytics, IT operations, sales and marketing, customer service, very, very popular. And I dare say this general stuff would just extrapolate into these and just bring out these bar graphs a little bit wider. So a lot of the data analysis, sales and marketing, customer service, IT operate, just stuff that you would be expecting. And even for IT operations, that probably means not really using much AI. Maybe even for data analysis, you might not be using too much AI. So it's very interesting how these workflows are actually built. But then over here we have most common provider for AI, OpenAI, with 30% of workflows actually using the OpenAI provider. Now, once again, not every single workflow used AI in it. I think from the stat above, we had 45% of workflows did use some AI. So I think it's 30% total out of the 47% used OpenAI. So this is the most common one to use. And then going down a little bit further, we have the actual top 10 nodes. So in this section, I'm actually going to be going a little bit deeper into these nodes that people are using. So sticky note we went through, set we didn't go through the set actually. Oh yeah, we did. We went through the set. I've been thinking about this recently as well, right? And you've got the set node here, you've got the HTTP request, which is super, super common as well. Like let's actually just start building out a workflow. So let's say we have when clicking execute a workflow, or actually let's just use this. And let's imagine we're building out one of these AI workflows. So like 40% of workflows are using some kind of AI. So that's what we have over here. Then they're using the OpenAI model. So now we're kind of building out the most commonly built out scenario. We have a sticky note, we have a set node we need to put in, we have a HTTP request, so let's add that as well. So that's a HTTP tool here for the actual AI agent. The output of this might very well be a code node to process the output. We might have a set node here. So based on the output of the AI agent, maybe after we process the output, we might set some variables. So something like this. And then we're looking at an if. Okay, so then for the if, depending on the previous value that we're setting, if we go across to the flow, we have this if over here. So the if is very basic. All it does is it just switches between true and false for the output. So that means that a lot of these workflows that people are building would include some kind of LLM processing here. Actually, by the way, it's not all AI agents. Like if you also press this plus button, you go to AI, there's a bunch of different AI LLM steps. So you can actually do information extracting, sentiment analysis, summarization. So these are like just specialty AI agents that only do one specific task. So let's say text classifier. That's how this specific node looks over here. So you still have to plug in some kind of, let's say, OpenAI chat model, and it can perform some kind of classification on a text that you insert. But what we're really looking at here is that typical workflows will have this kind of gate, and it'll route the workflow based on a previous entry of data. So you have an AI agent maybe making a choice. It provides some output data. You set that data to the gate field. Then the gate field would then flick between true and false and then do some other actions as well. Over here, we've got a manual trigger as one of the most common ones, but in our case, we're using a chat trigger. I think some of the workflows would also have something like this, where for testing, you can actually just press this button to test the workflow, but they would maybe also have some kind of other entry. Like if we go into this trigger and we choose on app event, and we might want to fire it off every time an Airtable event happens. So you can technically have multiple triggers into your AI agent. I don't recommend it, but I think for like testing, sometimes you might just want to trigger it manually and see what's happening while you're in the workflow, where you don't actually have to go into Airtable and make a change, because that gets tedious. So that's what I think is happening with this analysis over here. LangChain LM chat.openai, that's just this node over here. It's an AI agent node. Google Sheets, merge, and then LangChain AI agent. So let's say we have some kind of output here. Maybe we then go across to Google Sheet, and then we add this data. Where is it? Append row. So then if the output of this is false, we just log it in Google Sheet. If the output is true, we classify the text, and then maybe we do some kind of other output, whatever that may be. And then maybe we actually, okay, so you have a merge over here. So maybe for this, there might be a couple of different options that occur. Maybe the true has a multiple route, and maybe this route is like a HTTP request. And then we're using the merge node. So the merge node is literally coming into here. Let's type in merge. And then we just bring in both of these two values together. And now we have one single output to complete our flow, whatever that may be. The top 10 integrations, what we're looking at is like, what are the most common tools that people are integrating with? So OpenAI is the most common one. We've got Google Sheets, Gmail, Google Drive. So actually Sheets is for like storing data. Gmail, Telegram, Slack, and this email node are all communication. So communication is a massive one for n8n scenarios. Actually, if you go to n8n community nodes, the most downloaded ones are all communication apps. So communication is huge for AI and automation. Google Drive, you actually need in order to use Google Sheets. It's a precursor because the sheet is within a drive. So I think that's why you have Drive here. And then you have Airtable, which is like a Google Sheets, but just a little bit better. And then you have Notion, which is like second brain or just for storage of data as well. So those are the most common integrations. And actually, it should be pretty obvious that if you're using those as integrations, they're also the most common credential types. So OpenAI is the most common credential type, Google Sheets auth, Gmail auth, Google Drive auth, Airtable. So all this kind of stuff is literally because most common integrations, and then most common credential types in order to use those credentials as well. And then over here, we have most common node sequences. So to break down some of these node sequences, we have a set block going into a HTTP request. So that means that whenever you have a set block like this, sometimes people will actually put a HTTP node right afterwards because they're using the field. Where is it? They're using the field from the set block as a placeholder to insert into a HTTP call, something like this. So they'll set something here, and then they'll flick it right into here, into this HTTP call, and then they'll make their API call. You have HTTP request to HTTP. This is just this. This is actually very common as well, and I can tell you 2 use cases for this. So for example, I use Odoo as an ERP for my e-commerce store. When you're making an Odoo API call, you first have to send an authentication API call, which returns to you a user ID. Then you have that user ID, and then you can insert it into an API call to get data back from Odoo by using that user ID. So 2 API calls in a sequence is not too strange. Also, like when you're using Zendesk or a ticketing tool to get to do customer service automation, sometimes you make one API call that gets you ticket data at a high level. You immediately want to make this another API call that gets you comment data of that ticket. And then by making 2 API calls, you've got a holistic view of the ticket. So actually 2 API calls in order is not too uncommon. You've got an if node to a set node. So in this case, you've got an if, and then the output would be one of these sets. And what you're probably seeing here is that we're using a lot of these like data processing nodes, a lot of these logic nodes. So that's what we have here. If going into a HTTP request, a manual trigger going into a set node. So that kind of makes sense here. If you're actually testing out your workflow, like we had an Airtable before, typically the Airtable would like tell you which cell was changed. So in our case, if we want to replicate that, you might actually have a value here, and the value is called something like Airtable cell. And then you might manually set it here, so that when you flick off this workflow here, it actually tries to replicate you getting an Airtable information and putting it into your agent. And then we have a couple of other ones, HTTP to a set, and if to a no operation, and then a set to a set. So a lot of these, this is another comment I want to make. A lot of these, this set field, this if, we can also have this like, there's a switch one somewhere. We had merge we already used before. We have switch. A lot of these nodes, these nodes, a lot of these data processing ones are all just a code node at heart, but just specialized for a specific task. So in the back end of the edit fields, it's literally just a bunch of code that has a placeholder that says input the field name and then input the value that you want to set that name to. I'm a big fan of not really using the edit fields or switch or the if node wherever possible. I mean, the if node you might want to use, but rather a switch node, because a switch, you can actually have multiple outputs depending on a bunch of different workflow scenarios that you create. But really, my main go-to is to use a code node. Let me just break this off and branch it off, is to use a code node like this. And the code node I typically always use after some kind of data processing. So it might come from an AI agent. It might come from an API call like this, so like a HTTP call. After I do some kind of data sending or receiving, I always plug it into a code node to extract the details, the information that I want. And then I actually plug it into a different part of the workflow. And a code node you can make dynamic. Because you're writing code, that's the if you strip n8n down to its core, it's all code on the back end. And there's a really easy way that you write code. It's basically you go into ChatGPT and you say you're an n8n, write you a code node to process some data. So I can make a video, a deep dive on that. Actually, it's one of my favorite things to do is use a code node. That's what we see here. There's just a bunch of different people, a bunch of different uses for data processing here. And then going down a little bit more, we've got a bunch of workflows that have unused nodes. So when you're building out a workflow like this, so let's say we were just to try and connect this up somehow. I'm just going to delete this and kind of like remove some of these duplicates. And that goes into this set field, and delete this. So sometimes when you're building out scenarios, you're kind of left with these little trailing nodes. And what this is saying is that 7% of all scenarios include these trailing nodes, and you really want to clean them up. So one point you should already be seeing is make sure you use right titles, make sure you tag it, use the appropriate sticky notes to actually make sure that your actual scenarios have the appropriate documentation in case you have many people on your account. Clean up your scenarios so they're not dirty, so they're not messy. Use a roughly 10 to 14 nodes per workflow. Like what do we have over here? We've got a couple of starters. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So 13 nodes, maybe one more 14 if we want to like go to a Google sheet to complete the workflow, whatever we want to do, append a row in a sheet. And this is what defines a successful automation already. Like this is the within range 14 nodes average to complete a certain workflow. And you can actually stop here and have your task be completed already. Some other information, we have API calls and loops. I'm going to kind of skip over that. Parallelization is just this type of workflow where you're running 2 things in parallel. And then you have, 97% didn't have any error handling. So us, for example, here, we would have to come into here and maybe say, retry on fail 3 times. And then if there is an actual error that we could not go through, continue using an error flow. And maybe your error flow here, I don't know, it shouldn't loop back into here, obviously, but like you would build some kind of sequence for this as well. Some other security measures are when you're using webhooks without authentication, so that leaves your actual workflow a little bit vulnerable. A webhook is just a trigger. So let's go to webhook call. And this means that your workflow is started when you're calling it from a different tool. So this is like an API call into your n8n scenario. And over here, you've got a bunch of different settings where you can actually change the authentication. You have basic, you have header, you have a different token type that you can actually create as well. And this just means whatever you choose for your authentication here, you just have to make sure you're using the exact same authentication on the invoking API call. So wherever else you're sending off that request from, that API call must also use the same credential that this is expecting. Unsecured HTTP calls and using API key in the auth just means that when you're making API calls, like where is the HTTP node, that you don't really want to be doing headers where you have like API key is one of the headers, and that you have your raw API key like this. Typically, you want to create a new credential type, so a predefined credential type or generic credential type, and then you just embed it into the credential details of n8n, and then that's how you use your API call. So yeah, so that was a deep dive into this analysis that we had. I would actually recommend you guys to go through now and read through this. So this document will have some more bits and pieces for you to go through. I want to keep this video short. So if you do go through this and you want to see me kind of create another video on like how to create workflows based on this analysis, I can find more workflows, scrape even more of these workflows, run them through the exact same process. And the more that I have, the more accurate these systems will be, the more accurate this analysis will be. But as you go through this actually gives you a summary of all the stuff that we covered. It tells you how many workflows we scraped. It tells you best practices for using error triggers, how to implement them directly into your workflow. Gives you these little cool diagrams about error handling in your actual when you're building it out, so how to add it to your template. We have, what else do we have here? Common problems, webhook security. It tells you exactly how to do that. It tells you the most secure to the least secure. So the least secure is no auth and the most secure is OAuth 2. And you have different, basically goes through everything that we spoke about, and it tells you exactly how to insert that dynamically with variables into your workflows. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it was a relatively technical overview of analysis of 2,000 different workflows. If you want to see more videos like this, if you want to see me create more videos about how to build actual workflows, not only showing you how to build workflows, but like a process that you can follow, we can build production-ready workflows that adhere to all the learnings that we had here, drop a note in the comments below, and I'm happy to make more content like this. All right, guys, enjoy your more optimized workflows. See ya.